All right. We switched sides of the web today. All right. Today is our first day where we're going to be discussing server-side stuff. And as I usually do whenever I bring up client-side and server-side stuff, I want to draw a diagram that I always draw. Looks like this. Here is a client, which is normally someone running a web browser. Could be other things. Could be a bot, search engine, indexing pages. Could be any number of things. But normally we think of the client as someone running a browser. They are connected to the internet. And they make requests. All right. Those requests go through the internet and are routed to the particular web server that the request was intended for. And if you study networking, you'll learn more about this, but too long didn't read version is that every machine on the web has an IP address, and the name of the website translates to an IP address through a domain name server, and the request gets routed among various servers on the internet till it makes it to the server that you want to access. That web server does its thing. All right. Now, in the case of plain old static HTML pages, web server doesn't have much work. It simply takes the file that was requested and delivers it to the client. And that file is going to contain HTML, CSS, JavaScript, maybe other stuff. Delivers sort of a whole package to the client. And the client views it in the browser. And at that point, once that page is loaded, client-side JavaScript can be used to manipulate the page that was delivered. Okay, now, with more complex web applications, like most everything that you access on the web, it's more complicated than that. eBay, Canvas, Amazon, Google, goes on and on and on. Virtually every major site that you talk about will be not a static web page, but will be a dynamic web page. What does a dynamic web page mean? It means that there are programs that the server runs that takes the information from the request and the instructions from the program and puts together on the fly a dynamic HTML package. Think of the difference between when you log on to Canvas and when I log on to Canvas. When you log on to Canvas, you supply in the text box your user ID and password. So do I. All right. That request gets sent through the internet to the Canvas server, and the server takes that data that you supplied, the credentials, pairs it up with the programs on the server's end, and produces a Canvas homepage just for you. So your Canvas homepage is going to show the courses that you're currently enrolled in. My Canvas is going to show currently the courses that I'm teaching. Once more, if we go into a course that we both share, that I'm the teacher for, you're a student in, we can do different things. All right, because I have different permissions as an instructor as opposed to a student. So, combination of the data and the program creates on the fly a dynamic homepage. All right. Now, oftentimes, this involves some database interactivity. Oftentimes, the web server itself is a client to the database server. So as part of the job of the programs that take your credentials and create a web page for you, a Canvas homepage for you, it's going to access the database and see what courses you're currently enrolled in and use that to create a Canvas homepage that shows only the pages you're in. And it would be the same thing for Facebook, same thing with Google Mail, Gmail, similar thing for eBay, all right? And there you go. If you do a search, it's sort of the same thing. Like if you were to access Google, you type in your request, that request makes it to the server. The server does its thing and creates a results page just for you at that time. Now that request contains a bunch of stuff. All right, it contains any form fields you have, but it also contains other information like where you are, what platform you're running, and so on. That's why, again, the example I give in some of my other courses is that that's why if you search for Italian restaurants in Google, your location's going to matter. Like if we did it here, it's going to show us Italian restaurants in or around Elyria, Ohio, as opposed to showing us Italian restaurants in Rome or whatever. There they probably would just call them restaurants, right? Right? But anyhow, you get the idea. All right, so by the time the server is done with its thing, it's sending HTML through the internet back there. So these languages that server-side programming is done in, ASP.NET, with C#, PHP, Ruby, Java, etc. The client never sees those. So like if you did a view source on a Google search results page, you're not going to see whatever server language Google uses. Or if you did a page source on your Canvas page, you're not going to see language that they use. So there's some implication for that. We're going to be writing the programs that create the HTML. All right, you might wonder why don't we study this first if this is what is most commonly used on the web? Well, you have to know how to write HTML in order to write a program that creates HTML, right? Just like you would need to know how to calculate, how to convert Fahrenheit to centigrade before you could write a program to calculate Fahrenheit to centigrade. So you have to know how to do it before you write the code to do it. So we're going to be writing those programs, and we're going to be writing them in PHP. All right. PHP is a little bit older language, but it's still fairly popular. The other implication of this is we can no longer just double click on our web pages and have them open up. All right. We have to request them through a web server. All right. Remember, this transformation of taking our programs here and creating HTML is done by the web server. And if we just open a file in a browser, it hasn't gone through a web server. We were able to do that with HTML files because browsers understand HTML. So we could just open up the HTML and you're good to go. All right. Whereas here, we have to run it through a web server. So on this machine, there's already a web server installed. IIS, Microsoft's web server. And the labs here at school have IIS installed there. So you can use what I'm going to talk about here. You'll have to do something a little bit different. Now, most of you will probably install XAMPP. And I made a little video about installing XAMPP. And you can watch that. What you should do as early as possible is install XAMPP on your computer and make sure you can run my examples. I have a couple of real simple examples today that we're going to go to start out, and as quick as you can, because if you don't get a server working, you can't do the PHP stuff, right? It just, you have no way to test it. So you need to get the web server installed and up and ready. It's relatively easy. Mac, Windows. It's already starting my download. I don't want to install it here because given that I already have a web server, that's going to create a web server running, that's going to create a conflict. Now, when you install the web server, you're going to have a special place, a special directory is going to be installed. And let's ask ChatGPT where it is installed, because I don't remember. In XAMPP, where is the server's root directory for web pages? In Windows, it's typically in C:\XAMPP/htdocs. In Mac OS, it's typically there. And in Linux, it's there. So you should have those directories there, and that's where you're going to put your pages. That's how you're going to put, if you're from now on, if your project contains any HTML pages, you'll put it in there along with your PHP pages. And then you're going to have to access them a certain way. Again, you can't just double click them. So I have a couple sample pages here. And I have sort of 3 versions of the same thing. And I don't know, we'll probably get through all of them today. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move them into my web server's root directory. Now remember, that's going to be different for you, the directory, unless you happen to be running IIS on your machine, which is possible, but not likely. So my root directory is in the folder C inetpub www root. There's already some files in there. You can keep them if you want to. There probably will be files in your root directory too, and you can keep them if you want. I'm going to delete them just so that they don't get in the way. I'm going to put my first PHP page in the web server's root. All right, so there it is. It's in the web server's root. Now to access it, you have to make sure your web server is running. All right, which there's a control panel for XAMPP that you can make sure your web server is running. Then you're going to type in the following. You're going to type in localhost / that takes you to the web servers directory. Then you type in the path to your file. So my file is in the web servers root directory, so I can type in first.php. And we get our page. Okay. If that file was in another folder like Lab1, if there was a Lab1 folder, and my page was in there, then I'd have to say localhost, that gets you to the web server's root directory. Inside the root directory is a Lab1 folder, and inside that folder is my page first.php. It's may not be obvious, but it's refreshing. All right, I'm going to go put it back where it was. I still haven't gotten used to Windows showing you your options and having the little thing up there with delete and all that. I'm primarily a Mac user, although I do use Windows for some things. That's just like here. I'm looking for delete, but it's up here. All right. So let's take a look at this. Now, our PHP pages are going to consist of a mix of HTML code and PHP code. So a PHP code contains anything that you could put in a regular web page. So it can have HTML, it can have JavaScript, it can have CSS, all those great things we learned before. But some of the page is going to consist of PHP instructions. For example, if you had to do this by hand, this would be very tedious to create a chart of numbers and the value of the numbers squared. You'd have to pull out a calculator, and then you might enter in a wrong answer, or if you tried to do it by hand, you're liable to make some mistakes or whatever. So this kind of repetitive thing, is probably best done by a computer program. That's the kind of things that computer programs, it's a breeze for them to do. So I'm going to go open this up, and we'll take a look at it. And again, my examples are very bare bones, but don't let that fool you. You can put anything you want in these. All right. So I have plain old HTML, the doc type, HTML tag, head tag with the title, body, then I have an H1 tag, end body, and end HTML. So that's plain old HTML. We know that we're in PHP land when we see code that looks like this. It starts with a $sign, question mark, PHP, and it ends with a question mark greater than sign. So everything between these markings is PHP land. So we're no longer in HTMLville, we're in PHP land. That means that our instructions are going to be in PHP. Now, First instruction we're going to look at is a print instruction. A print instruction sends to the browser whatever code we're printing. So this is going to send a table tag over to the browser. Print, and within quotes, double quotes, I have the table tag. That gets sent to the browser as a table tag. And we can see it if we view source here. If I view the page source, we can see there's that table tag that got sent over to the browser. We then output a TR with headings for number, squared, NTH, NTR, and that's right here. Or if we look at it, it's here. Then the fun starts, because we can write in what looks like JavaScript code with a few exceptions. So basically this follows the same programming style. The instructions follow the same programming style as C# and JavaScript, with one notable exception that we can see right now, and that is the variable start with a $sign. All right. If you are like me, you will forget that dozens of times as you're working on PHP. All right. But the variables start with a $sign. So this is a for statement. If I were to write this in JavaScript, it would look exactly the same, except this print would be something else. All right. Because remember, in JavaScript, we're dealing with a completed web page. On server-side code, we're creating HTML to send back to the client. And the other thing that would be different is there wouldn't be any $signs in front of these. So the other thing that's different is we don't have to declare variables. Notice nowhere do we declare a variable called n. We just start using it. And PHP is what's called a weakly type language, and it may sound cool, but it gets you into trouble because PHP sort of figures out what type of data something is. Like, okay, we put a number in the variable n, therefore that variable n must be a number. So I'm going to start n at 1. I'm going to repeat it as long as n is less than or equal to 100, and we're going to increment it by 1 each time through the loop. We calculate the square value. So the value of a number squared is that number times itself. And then we output a chunk of HTML, a TR, a T, and we contain the $n and the $s. PHP has what's called magic quotes. And that is, if you're within double quotes, if you specify a variable by giving the variable name, PHP is smart enough to know insert the value of the variable right there. So PHP will put in that TD tag, the value of n, and then the value of s. And we can see that. Now, one thing about server-side code is often it produces code that is difficult for humans to read. Because in this case, everything's all on one line. Browser has no issue with that, all right? But keep in mind, you're not really going to be doing a lot of debugging using the view source. You're going to be debugging the PHP code. All right. Now, to be fair, sometimes when things aren't working right, you will look at the HTML source. But in that case, the fact that it's not really formatted neatly, you know, not to worry about that. So this loop will start with n equal to 1. It will do it until n is not equal to or less than or equal to 100. So it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, dot, 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 97, 98, 99, 100. And the number in the column next to it is the value squared. Then we close the table tag and we're all done. All right, very, very, very straightforward example. Key things I want you to get from this example. First thing is how to differentiate if the code is PHP or if the code is HTML. It's PHP if it is contained in a block that starts and ends like this. When we have that, we know that we're in PHP land and we're going to put PHP instructions in here, not HTML instructions. The print command sends things to the browser. So this itself, this line itself doesn't send anything to the browser. It's just an internal calculation to calculate the value of the number squared. Every place you see print, that is going to be sending stuff to the browser. What kind of stuff can we send to the browser? We can send HTML tags to the browser. We can send values of variables to the browser. That's typically what we're going to do. We're going to send HTML tags and values of variables. So I guess that's the second thing. The third thing is the code is very much like JavaScript. The most notable difference is the variables are going to start with a $sign. All right, any questions over this example? And I urge you to play with it, you know. The nice thing about this is we've written this, you know, let's say our boss comes and says, well, we want that to be up to 1,000. We can make our change. Save it. Oops. Oh. That one still had the directory name. And now we go all the way up to 1,000. So imagine again if you had to do that by hand. It's a very repetitive thing, and therefore, might as well let a computer program figure it out. All right, let's look at PHP example 2. If I'm not mistaken, PHP example 2 is the same as PHP example 1 with one exception. Let's double check that to make sure I'm correct. It is. Goes from 1 to 100. What's the difference between these two? The difference between these two is the way that we separate our PHP and HTML code. These two things are equivalent. If you notice in this case, we're printing the table tag, we're printing the row of headers, we're printing the row containing the number and the squared. Here, we're not printing those, we just have those in our HTML. This is sort of two styles of programming. All right. And, you know, you do you, whichever one makes sense, play around with it, see what makes more sense for you. In this case, the HTML is simply in the HTML document. And the only thing that's in PHP is this, and these two statements. There's no significant advantage or disadvantages to either. It's more of a case of what makes sense to you, what's easy for you to conceptualize. Now, this is a little weird, you might think, because start of this for loop, it's in one PHP block, and the end of the for loop is in another PHP block. You're allowed to do that. Same thing with if statements. You can have parts of statements like if statements or for statements separated into different PHP blocks. It's all up to you to determine what you think is better. Comments in PHP are the same as comments in other languages. That's probably a bad comment, right? Because anyone that can read the language knows that that's what that does. But I don't know what else to say. All right. Now, I want to talk about two more things. We'll look at our third example. And I want to talk about what happens when PHP goes wrong. It sounds like the name of a sensationalistic TV special, When PHP Goes Wrong. Okay, I'm going to put these two files in here. And I'm going to call form.php, where I have just a basic starting value and an ending value. Then I have a button to process it. So I could type in, give me 1 to 100. And that gives me 1 to 100. I could type from 5 to 30. And it gives me from 5 to 30. All right. The form page is submitting to that second page. All right. We have our form page. We enter the data in there. We hit process, and then we call that page. Notice that our values are in the query string. Our form page is just simply an HTML form. There we go. The method is get, which means it's going to pass the information on the query string. And the action is first3.php. That's going to call the script named first3.php. Notice we have a name and an ID for each of the form fields. Text box for starting value, text box for ending value. All right. Our submit button then submits it, sends it to there. So we get sent over to this page. This page looks familiar, right? because it's basically the same as the others with just a little bit of an exception. This allows us to grab the values from the query string and put them in the variables start and end. Then instead of having my loop say n equals 1, so as long as n is less than or equal to 100, I put in n equals start, n is less than or equal to the ending value. So this makes it more dynamic because we can get whatever we want to, whatever range we want to. So this allows us to put that range in, and start and end will be pulled from the query string and plugged in here. And so we get a loop that loops not just 100 times every time, but as many times as we ask for. All right. This is enough for you to get your first PHP assignment done, because your first PHP assignment is going to be a Mad Lib. Now, Mad Lib is where you have a form that says pick a noun, pick an adjective, pick a color, and then you fill those things in to like make a funny story. You know, instead of Mary had a little lamb, you might have a space for name, a space for adjective, and a space for animal. So if you typed in Bill, big cat, it would say Bill had a big cat. And you do that by pulling the values from the query string and printing them in the midst of the poem or song or whatever you had. Now, what about when PHP goes bad? All right. There's no validation in this, right? We're just doing the very, very, very basic. So what if I type in green? Well, that was surprising. It actually doesn't give us an error. Why not? Because PHP is weakly typed. So it tries to do this instruction. It's like, okay, I'll try to start in at green and loop through as that, but there's no set, it doesn't make any sense, so it doesn't do the loop any times. All right. What if I had a full-blown syntax error, though? What if I said, and PHP is case sensitive, so what if I said 4 with a capital F? Changing the right one. Yeah. That was weird. That was surprising as well. It's possible there are settings that tell you to ignore case. Let's do this. Put a bunch of R's there. I know that's not going to work. All right. I get an error, and that error is sort of cryptic. Unexpected token, semicolon, in line 19. So we look in line 19. It doesn't really tell us what's wrong, but it tells us the errors around that area. Now, if you install XAMPP, you might not get that direct of an error message. it might just say that, it might just give you a status of 500 saying the page doesn't work. What you need to do to make your error messages work is to find your PHP ini. Ini is initialization. It's in your PHP folder somewhere. This one says development, yours may or may not say that. But we're going to open this up with Visual Studio Code. And we're going to find, it's a good idea to save your code before this, save your ini file before this. If we go way down here in it, search. Display errors has a value of on. That's what you want to make it. If it says off, the right ini file. It's a problem. Here we go. It's in CPHP. Oh, no, that's just the one I created. This might be configured differently. Look for the XAMPP. Look for where XAMPP puts the ini file. And make sure that that says on instead of off. XAMPP, how would I turn PHP error reporting on? And it will tell you, open the PHP configuration file and find it at XAMPP PHP and display errors to on. then restart the server. And you should be good to go. So I strongly urge you to turn the error catching or the error reporting on. The idea behind that is when you're in production mode, error messages can divulge secure information, and it can give hackers an idea of what's wrong, of ways to infiltrate your system. Therefore, a lot of times you'll display a very non-specific error message in production mode. But in development, you need to know exactly what went wrong. So therefore, you want to turn the error reporting on. Okay. Are there any questions at this point? All right. Do remember I'm out next week for cataract surgery. Hopefully these sick days will be slowing down. I'll have probably another cataract surgery in 3 weeks to a month after that. But you can always email me, because even if I'm not here, I'm checking my emails. And if you need to talk to me about something, you can arrange an appointment, even if I'm not physically here. All right, we will see you. We'll see you sometime soon.